Hello friends, today we will once again discuss the Nahanni Valley in Canada, better known as the Valley of Headless. For over a century, people have gone missing here, and some have been found without their heads. We already have a video on this topic in which we explored various incidents that occurred in this mysterious place. Today we will delve into the history, folklore and theories associated with this valley. To put it briefly, the Nahanni Valley is one of the wildest corners of our planet. Northern Canada is initially very sparsely populated, and the Valley of Headless is even more remote. You can only reach it by private plane, navigating dangerous rivers by boat, or undertaking a weeks-long hike. It is truly a wild area where people have been disappearing since the late 19th century. Hunters, prospectors, pilots, and even those trying to uncover the secrets of this valley. Some of them have been found decapitated, with skulls either vanishing without a trace or found near their bodies. We already discussed this in our first video. Be sure to check it out if you haven't seen it. Today we will focus on the folklore and history, as well as the theoretical explanations for what happens in Nahanni. We should start with folklore, since many theories are based on it. The area around the valley is inhabited by the Dean people, a tribe related to the Yellowknife Indians, who assisted Captain Franklin in his polar expedition. The Dean tribes occupy vast territories from the Mackenzie River to western Nunavut, essentially covering much of Canada's Northwest Territories in the most remote areas. Their primary way of life involves hunting, fishing, and trapping fur. While the Dean have had skirmishes with other tribes like the Inuit, they are not particularly warlike compared to others, such as the Sioux or the Iroquois. Like many other indigenous tribes, the Dean passed down their tales orally from generation to generation, and the stories about the Valley of Headless Men hold a special place in this context. According to legend, the Nahanni Valley was once inhabited by a nomadic and warlike tribe called the Naha. This is where the name Nahanni comes from, meaning land of the Naha people. The Naha often raided nearby areas, capturing women and supplies while ruthlessly slaughtering the men. As a result, the Dean lived in constant fear of them, and this panic led to the Naha lands being considered forbidden and later cursed. Thus, the Dean sought to avoid these lands and rarely ventured there, leaving the vast Nahanni Valley uninhabited. According to legends, one day the Dane grew tired of enduring endless raids and decided to take revenge. They gathered a large party and ventured into Nahanni, searching for a Naha settlement while moving through a canyon near Perry Creek, which is now known as one of the most remote locations. The Dene surrounded the village and began to advance, preparing for an attack. However, when they entered the wigwam, they found no one there. The fires were still burning, and the hides were warm, but the Naha people had vanished without a trace. Fearing what they had discovered, the Dean abandoned the area, marking it as cursed, and no one heard from the Naha again. They simply disappeared. Similar stories exist in other cultures around the world. Unfortunately, we lack archaeological evidence for the existence of the Naha aside from indigenous legends. However, field excavations in the Valley of Headless Men have never been conducted. On the other hand, linguists have uncovered an interesting fact. The languages of the Dean tribes bear similarities to the Navajo language, which is spoken in the southern United States, far removed from northern Canada. The Navajo also have a legend stating that they came from the distant north. This has led to the theory that the Navajo may indeed be the lost Naha. For a nomadic tribe, it is not unusual to leave their lands, especially when faced with danger. So, the first theory worth discussing is quite simple. In the early 20th century, when stories about decapitated bodies and strange deaths began to surface in the Nahanni Valley, some researchers took this as evidence that the Naha tribe still inhabited the region. According to reports, they allegedly reside in isolated cave systems that stretch for miles underground. Indeed, there are plenty of caves in the area, many of which remain impassable for humans. The absence of heads, or the heads carefully placed at the feet, fits this scenario. We know that most indigenous peoples of North America practice the ritual of scalping, which can be seen as a form of beheading an enemy. Perhaps the Naha tribe adhered to more traditional customs and took heads intact. Thus, the first theory suggests that this was a tribe of headhunters unwilling to allow outsiders onto their land. Moving on to the second theory, which is geological in nature. Due to its unique geological structure, the Nahanni Valley has avoided glaciation for at least the last 100,000 years. Along the valley's borders, paleontologists have discovered a wealth of unique finds, and some scientists believe that this region may contain some of the oldest fossils known. For example, a sponge-like fossil dating back 890 million years was recently found. Regularly, remains of mammoths and other prehistoric creatures are unearthed from eroded riverbanks. Legends suggest that descendants of Pleistocene creatures may have survived to this day, hiding in this isolated valley. Researcher Philip Gottschall recounts a story about Frank Beaton, a Scot who served in Fort St. John until 1945. Beaton was involved in numerous expeditions in the area in the early 20th century, and one of these groups encountered an indigenous guide who shared a tale about his father. His father traveled north to river country and encountered a primitive tribe armed with bone-tipped darts and clubs made from moose bones and jaws. These Stone Age people sat around campfires and spoke of a valley to the north inhabited by gigantic beings. One even showed him a piece of deer skin with a burned image of one of these monsters. The storyteller's father managed to trade for this skin and kept it as a talisman until passing it on to his son before his death. The indigenous man showed it to researchers who claimed that the figure on the deerskin depicted a dinosaur with detailed anatomy. Of course, this story sounds quite unusual, considering a Stone Age tribe discussing dinosaurs with a stranger. However, it is worth noting that significant numbers of dinosaur skeletons have been found in the Northwest Territories, particularly in the Bear Rock Sinkhole, which formed from the collapse of a large underground cave. This location fits the description in the tale. Another key point is that the climate on the northern side of Canada is quite harsh. For much of the year, these lands are covered in snow. Yet there is volcanic activity in the Nahanni Valley, with hot springs, geysers and areas that maintain their own warm microclimate, often leading to the formation of mists associated with strange occurrences in the region. There is a theory that within the valley lies a zone with a unique microclimate where it remains relatively warm, even during severe Arctic winters. This can be likened to Arthur Conan Doyle's The Lost World, where prehistoric animals may exist, posing dangers to valley visitors. We shouldn't forget about real animals that inhabit the Nahanni Valley. There is a large population of bears and wolves, and many official accounts point to them as potential culprits behind the missing heads. However, it is often overlooked that bodies were not consumed and that the heads simply disappeared. In one incident where a body was found in a sleeping bag without a head, police claimed that animals couldn't get to the body and thus carried the head away. It sounds rather strange, as if a bear had difficulty coping with a sleeping bag. Additionally, it's worth mentioning indigenous mythology, specifically their demonology, which includes a creature known as Nakanni. This should not be confused with the name Nahanni or the Naha tribe, although the words are related. The Dene people considered Nakanni to be hairy giant cannibals resembling humans, with red eyes and long muscular arms. These creatures and their mentions instilled terrifying fear among indigenous peoples. Emile Petito, a 19th century missionary who lived among them, noted in 1876 that every summer, a fear similar to an epidemic would arise among the indigenous peoples. He wrote, "Sometimes they live in constant fear of an imaginary enemy that infinitely pursues and, as they believe, watches them, even though it does not really exist." According to ethnographer Cornelius Osgood, the belief in Nakanni remained strong among indigenous peoples even in 1929. Osgood wrote that when they suspected the Nakanni were nearby, entire tribes would abandon their camps. John Feth, a Hudson's Bay Company trader, reported that sometimes indigenous peoples would fire muskets into the woods, believing imaginary night prowlers were hiding there, even though there was no one present. Researcher Michael Mason, in his 1924 book Arctic Forests, described Nakanni as terrifying wild people with red eyes, gigantic in stature and completely covered in long hair. Their large size was evidenced by 3-foot-long tracks and their ability to uproot birches with bare hands. Philip Gottschall, who extensively worked with the Dean people, described them as troglodytes, twice the average human height, who walked naked except for their hair. He compared them to gorillas and emphasized their superhuman strength and speed. In indigenous legends, Nakanni were portrayed as hairy demons the size of Kodiak bears, over 2 meters tall, swift as birds, killing everything in their path and tearing off heads. Rumor had it that their skin was so tough that bullets could not penetrate it, and that cutting it was more difficult than stone. This mythological version obviously intersects with cryptozoology, where Nakanni are compared to Bigfoot or Yeti, known in North America as Sasquatch. Many foresters and hunters have reported giant tracks of this creature left in the snow or mud, resembling human footprints but longer, featuring a prominently protruding big toe. The Dene claimed that the Nahanni Valley is the territory of Nakanni, and this belief is reflected in place names. For example, one river is called Nadi, meaning River of Giants. Unlike most mythical creatures, Nakanni have very detailed descriptions, even including life cycles. Attacks by Nakanni were noted almost exclusively in the spring and summer or early fall, while their winter whereabouts remained a mystery to indigenous peoples. Some said that Nakanni hide in camouflaged burrows dug in permafrost, where they spend the winter like bears. Others claim they migrate south to areas where their kin are more numerous. The Dene recognized the presence of Nakanni by tracks, fleeting figures in the bushes, and sometimes an unsettling feeling that they were being watched. When a Nakanni decided to attack a camp, it would hide in trees near the firelight and wait. Sometimes they would throw stones and sticks at people to scare them, or emit strange whistling sounds or noises resembling human laughter or wailing howls, resembling the wind passing through the mountains. Similar mythological beings with analogous characteristics are known in other parts of the world, on the Caucasus, Pamir, Yamal, Himalayas, and many other places. In rare cases, Nakanni targeted young women. Those who managed to escape their grasp described a strong nauseating odor that preceded the attack. Some reported an all-consuming terror, as if the Nakanni possessed some hypnotic power over them. Encounters with Nakanni have also been reported in modern times. For instance, on July 28, 2016, CBC published an article about an encounter with Nakanni reported by Tony Wiley, a native of the community of Vati. This young man was paddling from his hometown to the northern tip of Lake Lamart. He noticed a bag bobbing on the waves and leaned over to grab it, but the canoe tipped over, and he fell into the icy water. Tony tried to flip the canoe back over, but had no luck. He then swam to the nearest island and further recounts. Suddenly a large man appeared next to me. He stood there looking at me for a few seconds before walking away. I heard branches breaking in the bushes. I gathered my wet clothes and ran. Tony spent 2 days on the riverbank, convinced that the mysterious island resident was watching him from hiding. On July 19, 2016, a Canadian military search party rescued Tony, and he later claimed that he hadn't closed his eyes for the entire duration of his ordeal. The version of the mythical creature resembling Bigfoot indeed has similar traits not only in North America, but also in the Caucasus, where such beings are known as devas. Now let's move on to another mythological creature of the indigenous peoples, the Wahila. According to descriptions from the Dene tribe, the Wahila resembles a large wolf-like beast comparable in size to an adult bear, with long white fur. In the summer of 1965, one of the indigenous people led cryptozoologist Frank Graves to the Krause Hot Springs, located in the southern Nahanni, about 60 kilometers upstream from the small village of Nahanni Butte. Until 2010, there were no roads leading to the village, which was home to just 86 people, 80 of whom were indigenous. This expedition aimed to reach an area with warm climatic conditions and vegetation atypical for northern latitudes. For cryptozoologists, this place would be a true cold grail, where snow people, dinosaurs, and other unusual creatures might reside. During the expedition, Graves indeed encountered several large tracks that, in his opinion, could belong to a relict hominid. However, the quality of the impressions left much to be desired. Unexpectedly, he had an encounter with something entirely different. He recalls, "A huge white creature, which I initially took for a polar bear, stepped out from behind the trees. It wasn't a bear but something more, resembling a giant dog. It stood on long legs and looked like a dog or wolf. I've seen many wolves, but this animal was 20 times larger than any of them. In a panic, I shot at it. It was less than 20 paces away, and my gun was loaded with shot. However, the creature simply turned away and slowly walked into the forest. I reloaded and fired again, knowing I hit it in the rear, but it just kept going." The indigenous guide identified this animal as the ghost wolf, creatures that are often mentioned by native people from northern Ontario to Alaska. Cryptozoologist Sanderson, based on Graves's descriptions, suggested that this creature might be a descendant of the Amphision or the bear dog, real animals that existed in these areas thousands of years ago, bones of which are found by modern paleontologists. There are legends of hunters encountering fresh tracks of prehistoric mammals and bringing back huge tusks, still bearing fibers of flesh and hair. There are also accounts from the elders of the Dene tribe, who could accurately depict mastodons as if from memory. However, doubts arise regarding the accuracy of these stories. Perhaps the cryptozoologist simply dreamed of seeing something unusual and was actually shooting at an ordinary bear. Given the size of the bustling creature, its long white fur and its low sensitivity to shot, it is quite likely that it was a Kermode bear with thick fur and a layer of fat. Among the more eccentric theories is the concept of a hollow earth, according to which the Nahanni Valley serves as an entrance to this mysterious cavity. In reality, the valley is full of caves, about 250 are known, with many others yet to be explored, extending for kilometers underground. Proponents of this theory suggest that the entrance leads to a hollow earth, where the unknown and incomprehensible lurk. It is possible that some of the inhabitants of this cavity are aggressive beings that decapitate anyone who enters their territory. Furthermore, attention should be paid to the theory of the mist often enveloping the valley. Some missing expeditions reported such mist over radio communications. As previously mentioned, there is seismic activity occurring in the valley, which may well be related to gas emissions that affect the human nervous system and cause erratic behavior. Now let's step away from mystical hypotheses and turn our attention to more realistic versions of events. Northern Canada is not a tropical paradise, but rather a terrain with a harsh climate, raging rivers, swamps, and wildlife, where one can freeze, drown, or even fall victim to bears or wolves. Therefore, people who went missing in this region might simply have been unable to withstand the challenging conditions. In my opinion, a more likely explanation is the criminal version. The Nahanni Valley is known to be rich in gold, and it is quite possible that some groups of prospectors were mining it without wanting to share with others. This is supported by reports of burned cabins, charred clothing found on some bodies, signs of gunfire, and bodies clutching weapons. Additionally, there is the complete absence of gold among the prospectors who wrote home, claiming they had become fabulously wealthy. Let's not forget that bears, dinosaurs, or other animals cannot set fire to a camp and take all the gold. It seems more probable that a local gang, not wishing to have competition in resource extraction, could be responsible for most of these incidents. I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this story. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If so, don't forget to like the video. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, be sure to do so. Take care.